An old man lies quietly in a small village clinic, his breath fading with each passing hour, when suddenly something stirs deep in the African savanna. A lion, aged and scarred, begins a silent journey across the grasslands. But this isn't just any lion. It's one the old man once saved from the edge of death. And now, as the man nears his final moment, the lion is coming, not to hunt, not to roar, but to say goodbye. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe, like the video, and tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. Now, let's jump into the story. In a quiet village nestled beside the endless grasslands of East Africa, an old man named Baraka Tuma sat on a wooden stool outside his small mud brick home. His eyes, still sharp despite the years, followed the movement of the wind through the golden grass. The sky stretched wide above him, painted in the deep orange of a setting sun. This was his favorite time of day, when the world was calm and the land seemed to breathe with him. Baraka had once been a wildlife guardian, known across the region for his deep knowledge of the land and its creatures. For over 50 years he had walked the savannah with nothing but his walking stick, a field bag, and a fierce love for the wild. He had tracked elephants, guided baby zebras to safety, and once even stood face to face with a charging buffalo. But Baraka had never been afraid. His heart had always been steady and his voice calm. Now, though his body was slower and his steps more careful, the wild still whispered to him. The animals still remembered him. Even the wind seemed to know his name. His granddaughter, Lena, a kind-hearted young nurse, stepped out of the house with a steaming cup of tea. She placed it beside him and gently touched his shoulder. "You've been sitting here for hours, Babu," she said softly. "The evening air is getting cold. Come inside soon." Baraka smiled without turning his head. "Look at the light," he said, gesturing to the sky. "When it glows like this, the lions are beginning to wake. You can almost feel the earth stretch." Lena looked at him with love. He always spoke like the land was alive, like the animals were his family. And maybe, in a way, they were. She gave his shoulder a light squeeze. "I'll finish dinner. Don't stay out too long." Baraka nodded slowly, his gaze still fixed on the horizon. That night, as Lena chopped vegetables in the kitchen, she heard a soft thud from the front of the house. She rushed outside and found Baraka slumped over, his cup of tea spilled beside him. "Babu!" she cried, kneeling at his side. His face was pale and he clutched his chest. His breathing was shallow. Lena shouted for help. Neighbors came running. A small truck was brought, and with care, they lifted Baraka into the back and rushed him to the village clinic. Inside the simple health center, Lena held his hand tightly. The room smelled of antiseptic and dust. Baraka lay still, his chest rising and falling like a weak breeze. Lena whispered to him, brushing back the thin strands of white hair from his forehead. "I'm here, Babu. Just rest. You're not alone." Word spread quickly through the village. One by one, people gathered outside the clinic. Young rangers who had learned from Baraka, mothers who remembered him chasing off hyenas in the fields, children who had sat on his lap to hear stories of the savannah. As the night deepened, a man arrived, walking slowly with the help of a carved stick. His name was Rafe, Baraka's oldest friend and fellow guardian. He had shared the wild with Baraka when they were young men, patrolling together during long nights, fighting off poachers, and building trust with the animals. He entered the clinic, without a word, sat at the foot of Baraka's bed, and simply bowed his head. No one needed to speak. They had shared a lifetime of stories in silence. Far away, beyond the edge of the grasslands, a shape stirred beneath a cluster of acacia trees. A great lion, scarred and aging, lifted his head. His mane was thick but now streaked with gray. One of his legs bore an old wound that had healed but still made him limp. His name, given by the rangers long ago, was Kamari, a name that meant the brave one. Years before, when Kamari had been a young lion, strong and wild, he had been caught in a cruel trap. His leg had been nearly torn apart. Poachers had left him to die. But it was Baraka who had found him. It was Baraka who had freed him, cleaned his wounds, and stayed beside him for days, feeding him water and meat until he could walk again. When Kamari had finally stood, Baraka had whispered to him, "Go back to the land, but don't forget," and Kamari hadn't. Now in the stillness of night, something in the air had changed. The lion sniffed the breeze. There was silence where there should have been rhythm. Something was missing. He rose slowly and began to walk, one step at a time, away from the trees, across the quiet plains, toward the village he had never visited. Animals watched him pass. Antelope paused. Baboons grew quiet. Even the wind seemed to hush. Something old was waking, something sacred. The guardian of the grasslands had called, and the lion was answering. The village slept under a pale moon, its huts quiet and still. A soft wind moved through the tall grass, brushing against the rooftops like a whispered lullaby. But while the people rested, something else stirred far from their homes. Kamari, the old lion, walked with slow but steady steps across the plains. His thick mane moved with the breeze, now silvered by time. A scar traced the side of his leg, an old wound that never fully healed, a mark from the trap that nearly took his life. But more than the scar, it was the memory of kindness that kept him moving. Years ago, when he had been young and wild, pain had been his only company. That snare had crushed his leg and broken his spirit. But then came Baraka, with calm eyes and steady hands. The man had knelt beside him, whispering soft words while loosening the trap. He had cleaned the wound, fed him, and slept beside him, beneath the stars until the lion could stand again. Kamari had never forgotten. Now something in the air told him it was time. He moved through the land with a silent grace. Antelope paused mid-step. Hyenas gave him space. Even the night birds stopped their song. There was a stillness in the air, as if all the wild things understood where he was going. Back in the village, Lena sat at her grandfather's bedside. The small clinic room was dimly lit, with only the soft hum of an oil lamp and the slow rhythm of Baraka's breathing. Each breath was a struggle, each pause a question. Rafe, Baraka's old friend, hadn't left since he arrived. He sat by the window, staring into the night, thinking of the old days. He and Baraka had shared stories no one else knew. The wild had shaped them both, left marks on their bodies and hearts. "He's holding on," Lena whispered, placing a cool cloth on her grandfather's forehead. "But he's getting weaker." Rafe nodded slowly. "He's waiting." "For what?" Rafe looked toward the dark savannah. "For someone who remembers." Lena didn't ask more. She only held her grandfather's hand tighter. Farther out in the wild, Kamari reached the edge of a dry riverbed. He paused, sniffing the wind again. The air was heavy with the scent of dust and firewood smoke, signs of the village not far away. He continued on, walking past thorn trees and old watering holes. His paws, though worn, moved with purpose. Didn't know how he remembered the way. He had never visited the village, but something deeper than sight guided him, an invisible string tied to a memory, pulling him closer with every step. By dawn, the first colors of the sun crept over the horizon. The sky turned from black to blue, then slowly to orange and gold. Shadows stretched long across the grass as the village began to wake. It started with a bark, then another. The dogs near the outer huts began to growl and yelp. One bolted for cover, tail tucked between its legs. From behind a hut, a shape emerged, large, golden, and powerful. A lion. The people panicked. Children were pulled indoors. Mothers screamed. Men grabbed sticks, spears, anything they could find. No lion had ever come this close to the homes. No lion had ever walked into their world like this. But Kamari did not roar. He did not run. He walked slowly, steadily past the outer huts toward the village center. Inside the clinic, Lena heard the noise. She rushed to the window, pushed back the curtain, and gasped. A lion stood just beyond the garden gate. She turned to her grandfather. "Babu," she whispered, her voice shaking. "He's here." Baraka's eyes fluttered. He hadn't moved in hours, but now, slowly, they opened. A thin smile formed on his lips. Kamari, he breathed. Outside, the crowd parted. Some whispered, in fear. Others stood frozen in awe. Then Rafe stepped forward, moving past the frightened villagers, his eyes fixed on the lion. The scar on Kamari's leg glinted in the sunlight. "It's him," Rafe said. "Lower your weapons." No one moved. Rafe raised his hand. "He's not here to harm us. He's here for him." Guards lowered their spears. Kamari stepped forward, calm and silent. His paws made no sound on the hard earth. He passed through the crowd like a shadow. No one stopped him. Inside the clinic, Lena opened the door. The lion entered. The air inside shifted. Nurses stepped back. One man dropped his pen. Everyone stared as the great beast moved toward Baraka's bed. Kamari stopped just beside it. Baraka's hand lifted, weak and trembling. Lena gently helped him reach the lion's mane. His fingers touched the coarse fur. His smile grew. No words were needed. In that moment, all was still. Man and lion, healer and healed, bound by time and kindness, and in the silence the wind whispered through the open window, carrying with it the breath of the wild. The village of Nyanda had never seen anything like it. A lion, a real full-grown lion, stood at the door of the clinic, calm as the morning breeze. The sun had just risen, spreading soft light across the village, but no one noticed the colors of dawn. All eyes were on the lion with the silver-threaded mane and the scar along his leg. People held their breath. Kamari, the lion who had once ruled the far plains, stood quietly at the edge of human life. He did not growl. He did not roar. He simply waited. Inside the clinic, Lena gently helped her grandfather, Baraka, lift his trembling hand. His breathing was shallow now. His body was tired. But his spirit had been waiting for this moment. Kamari stepped forward. The nurses inside moved aside, unsure whether to scream or pray. The lion's paws made soft thuds on the tiled floor. He passed empty chairs, an old medicine cart, and wide, stunned eyes. Then he reached Baraka's bedside. The lion looked down at the man who had once saved his life. His golden eyes, though fierce by nature, now seemed full of understanding. Lena felt her throat tighten as she watched. Baraka smiled faintly and whispered something too soft to hear. His fingers brushed through the lion's thick mane. Kamari lowered his head beside the bed, close enough to feel Baraka's weak breath on his fur. And then he lay down, not in fear, not in submission, but in companionship. He rested his great head on the floor beside the man's bed and closed his eyes. For a long while the room was still. The usual hospital sounds, beeping machines, distant voices, clinking metal, faded into the background. It was as if the world had paused. Outside, Rafe stood in the doorway, watching with wet eyes. He had known Baraka for most of his life, but he had never seen him look so peaceful. "He came," Rafe whispered. Lena nodded, her voice barely holding. "Yes, he came." Villagers gathered outside the clinic's courtyard. Some stood in silence. Others whispered stories they'd heard as children, tales of Baraka's bravery, of wild animals that once followed him through the bush like loyal dogs. Now the stories were no longer stories. They were watching one unfold. Children peeked from behind their mothers. Elders lowered their heads in respect. A few people wept openly. No one dared step inside. The lion was no threat, but his presence demanded stillness. In that quiet room, something deeper than fear or amazement filled the air. It was reverence. The day passed slowly. Hours slipped by, but Kamari did not leave. He remained by Baraka's side, breathing in sync with the old man's slowing breath. From time to time, Lena would whisper to her grandfather, hold his hand, or place a damp cloth on his forehead. She watched his chest rise and fall, each time wondering if it would be the last. Kamari, too, would open his eyes now and then, lift his head, and nudge gently at the edge of the bed, as if to remind Baraka he was not alone. It was nearly evening when the change came. The light in the room had turned golden again, like it had the night Baraka first collapsed. Shadows stretched across the walls. A cool breeze moved through the window, stirring the curtain gently. Baraka's breath, already faint, slowed further. Lena leaned close and whispered, "We're here, Babu. We're with you." Baraka didn't speak, but his hand squeezed hers just once and then relaxed. His eyes closed. One final breath passed his lips like a soft sigh. His face, marked by time and sun, seemed to smooth. He looked like a man finally at peace. Lena held back tears. Rafe placed a hand on her shoulder, steady but shaking. Kamari didn't move. He remained beside the bed, still and silent. His ears flicked at the sounds outside, but he made no sound. He only stayed, just as he had stayed years ago when he was, wounded and weak, watched over by the same man who now lay still beside him. Minutes passed, then an hour. Finally, Lena whispered, "Thank you." Kamari opened his eyes slowly, met her gaze, then laid his head back down. Word spread quickly through the village. Baraka Tuma, the guardian of the grasslands, the man who had once walked side by side with nature, was gone. But he had not gone alone. The morning after Baraka Tuma passed, the village of Nyanda awoke in silence. The usual sounds of early cooking fires and cheerful chatter were missing. Instead, the people moved slowly, their faces heavy with sorrow. The man they had known as the protector of the grasslands, the storyteller, and the quiet warrior of the wild, was gone. But something unusual had remained through the night. Lion Kamari had not left Baraka's side. He stayed curled on the floor next to the bed where the old man had drawn his final breath. His great head rested near the edge, his golden eyes half closed, his body still but alert. The nurses did not try to move him. The guards outside the clinic no longer watched in fear. The villagers who gathered around the windows and door did not make a sound. Everyone seemed to understand. This lion had come to say goodbye. By mid-morning, Lena stepped into the room carrying a small bundle of wildflowers. She paused in the doorway, her heart aching, her eyes red. But as she looked at Kamari, something in her eased. The lion slowly raised his head and met her gaze. They didn't need words. They shared something deeper now. A bond born not just from grief, but from honor. Outside in the courtyard, the people of the village prepared a farewell. A wooden platform was built beneath a wide tamarind tree, its branches full of leaves that swayed gently in the warm wind. Villagers brought flowers, carvings, and colorful cloth. Children drew pictures on paper and leaves, some of Baraka, some of animals, and some of a lion with a scar and soft eyes. When Baraka's body was brought out, wrapped in clean linen and laid gently on the platform, the people gathered in a wide circle around him. Rafe stood beside him, holding the walking stick they had once shared on patrol. Lena stood at the head holding Noah, her baby nephew, close to her chest. And then, slowly, Kamari walked into the courtyard. No one moved. No one spoke. The lion stepped forward, his paws quiet on the dirt, his head held high. He reached the platform, stopped and bowed his head. A low sound came from his throat, not a roar, not a growl, but something deep and mournful. A single sound that echoed across the quiet village. A sound of loss, of respect, of farewell. The people wept openly then, not just for Baraka, but for the world he had built. A world where humans and wild creatures could understand one another, even if just for a moment. After the ceremony, the villagers walked together to a grassy hill just beyond the reserve's edge. This was a place Baraka had loved, a quiet spot under an acacia tree where the wind always seemed to sing. They dug a simple grave lined with stones and placed Baraka gently inside. Lena placed the wildflowers at his feet. Rafe carved a wooden marker with the words Baraka Tuma, guardian of the wild. When the last stone was laid, Kamari stepped forward one final time. He stood by the grave, silent and still, as the wind stirred the tall grass. Then, with a final look toward the people he had walked among, he turned and disappeared into the savannah. No one followed. No one spoke. They let him go, knowing this moment was part of a story far greater than any one of them. In the weeks that followed, life in the village slowly returned to its rhythm. The market reopened. Children returned to school. Farmers walked their fields. But something in the village had changed, something gentle and sacred. People began visiting the grave under the acacia tree. They brought flowers, stories, and even drawings. Travelers from other places came too, having heard of the lion who came to say goodbye. Lena returned to her work at the clinic, but every evening she walked to the edge of the reserve, where she could see the horizon stretch endlessly into the wild. Sometimes Rafe joined her. They didn't always speak. Sometimes they just stood in silence, remembering the man who had taught them to listen to the land. And every now and then, as the sun dipped low and the shadows grew long, someone would spot a shape at the edge of the tall grass. A lion, golden, silent, watching. Kamari never came too close again, but he returned now and then, like a memory wrapped in fur. He would stand for a few minutes near the grave, bow his head, and then vanish into the tall grass. The people began to believe he was more than a lion. He was a guardian too, not just of the wild, but of the story, of a man and a lion, two lives once touched by kindness, forever bound by it. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And tell us in the comments, what does this story mean to you?